Welcome to Hoenn, everybody. In this region we will discover 135 new Pokemon species. This is a video I've been working on for a long time, and I'm really excited to finally get to share it with you guys. So without further ado, on to the top 11 Gen 3 Pokemon. What is up, everybody, and welcome to this special edition Pokemon Go video. So as you can probably tell from the title of this video, this is going to be a very comprehensive review of the top 11 Pokemon coming to Pokemon Go. Now, the reason I picked a top 11 rather than a top 10, which is pretty standard, is because honestly the top 11 Pokemon, they're really going to be the game changers when it comes to Pokemon Go. So I just couldn't leave number 11 off of the list. Now, the reason I'm calling this a comprehensive review is because we're not only going to look at each Pokemon's max CP and its name, we're going to dive into individual stats and abilities. Which reminds me, we should probably talk about abilities first for those who may not know what they are. I feel like I should preface this by saying that abilities aren't necessarily coming to the game. I really think they should, but I understand how big of a task that would be for Niantic to pull that off. We'll talk about how I believe abilities should be implemented and when at the end of the video, along with when I believe Gen 3 is coming to the game. So let's actually talk abilities. What are they? In the main series games, abilities were added, and they were basically a passive effect that happened during battle. So let me give you an example. There's an ability called Intimidate, and what Intimidate does is when the Pokemon that has the ability Intimidate comes into the battle, it automatically cuts its foe's attack stat. So abilities aren't something that the trainer has to initiate or tell the Pokemon to do in Pokemon Go, would be by tapping or swiping. It's something that just happens automatically. So the moment a Pokemon with Intimidate enters the battle, the foe's attack stat is automatically cut. So now that we know a little bit more about abilities, let's jump into the top 11 Pokemon coming to Pokemon Go. Coming in at number 11, we have Walrein, the Ice and Water type Pokemon. Being a Water and Ice type Pokemon, Walrein's going to have 4 main weaknesses: Electric, Rock, Grass, and Fighting. Walrein's going to come in with a max CP of 2,606. It has a defensive stat of 176 and a stamina stat of 220. Now, those are pretty good defender stats. However, Walrein also has a pretty good attack stat at 182. Walrein is going to enter the game as a great defender, a Pokemon that you can put in gyms. However, it's also going to be really good on offense, especially when you put it up against a Dragon-type Pokemon. Walrein will be the second best Dragon-type attacker coming out of Generation 3. We'll talk about number 1 later on in the video. Lastly, let's talk about Walrein's ability, Thick Fat. This ability is going to boost Walrein's resistance to fire and ice type moves, rendering them less effective than even usual. Overall, Walrein has really balanced stats, and it's a really well-rounded Pokemon. It's definitely going to be something you're going to want to have in your party. That's enough about Walrein. Let's move on to the top 10. Coming in at number 10, we have Blaziken, the dual fire and fighting type Pokemon. Blaziken's pre-evolution Torchic is what you would originally choose in Emerald, Ruby, and Sapphire as the fire type starter Pokemon. As we all know, the starter Pokemon in Pokemon Go aren't always necessarily the most useful Pokemon. Blaziken, however, will be pretty useful. Blaziken enters the game with a max CP stat of 2,631. It isn't necessarily crazy high, however, Blaziken's attack stat is what is going to make it so useful. This guy has an attack stat of 240, which is better than Charizard and Typhlosion. However, its defense and stamina stats hold it back as a gym defender, coming in at only 141 and 160. If you want him to last in battle, you're going to need pretty good dodging skills. So hopefully Niantic will continue to work on the gym glitches that we all know about. Blaziken's ability in the main series game was called Blaze. What this ability does is it boosts fire-type attack moves when this Pokemon is in trouble. So basically what this means is when Blaziken's HP gets low, its fire-type attack moves are going to get a boost. All in all, Blaziken's going to be a really good attacker, especially with its fire and fighting type dual movesets. However, in Pokemon Go, since we only get 2 moves, I recommend having one Blaziken with only fire type moves and maybe one Blaziken with only fighting type moves. That's if you're even lucky enough to get 2. I myself don't live in a fire biome, so there are almost never any fire Pokemon where I live. I will be moving here at the end of this month, so hopefully the area that I'm moving to has more fire type Pokemon. Because Blaziken overall is my all-time favorite fire type Pokemon. So obviously I'm going to want a couple of them. Now let's move on to number 9. Coming in at number 9, we have probably one of the coolest designs, in my opinion, in Pokemon history. I just really feel like they nailed it on this design. This is Armaldo, the rock Bug-type Pokemon. In the main series game, the only way you could obtain this Pokemon is through fossil regeneration, which made this Pokemon fairly rare and pretty hard to get. So I can only naturally assume that he won't be the easiest Pokemon to find in the wild. or at least its pre-evolution, Anorith. Armaldo is going to come into the game with a max CP of 2,675, with a pretty good attack of 222, a defensive stat of 183, and a stamina of 150. Now it'll be interesting to see how people end up using Armaldo in Pokemon Go. Will people use it mainly as an attacker? Will they use it mainly as a defender? That's up to you guys. However, at this point in the game, defending a gym doesn't really mean all that much. So basically it's going to be up to you guys as preference on whether you want to use Armaldo in the game. Armaldo has the ability called Battle Armor. In the main series games, this prevented the Pokemon from taking critical hits. We don't have anything like critical hits in Pokemon Go, so it'll be interesting should abilities be implemented by Niantic, how this ability would come into fruition. Time for number 8. Landing at the number 8 spot, we have a fighting type Pokemon, which is actually pretty nice considering we don't have a lot of good fighting types in the game. Basically, all we have are Machamp. So it's going to be really nice to see Hariyama implemented. Hariyama is going to enter the game with a max CP of 2,765. He's going to have a pretty good attack stat of 209, a not so great defensive stat of 114, and a really good stamina stat of 288. So what this Pokemon lacks in defensive ability, it makes up for in the fact that you're going to have to hit it a crap load of times before it finally faints. Hariyama has access to 2 abilities. However, and I'm not sure if I explained this earlier, a Pokemon can only have 1 ability at a time, and it's born with that ability. So the first ability Hariyama has access to is Thick Fat. This is the same ability we talked about earlier with Walrein, so I'm not going to go over that again. However, Hariyama's second ability that it can have is called Guts. This ability boosts Hariyama's attack stats when it's suffering from a status condition. Status conditions like poison, paralysis, etc. We don't have status conditions in Pokemon Go, so it'll be really interesting to see how this could be implemented into the game. I think Niantic's just going to have to give us a little more, and they're going to have to give us some kind of status condition. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I'd be down. Let's keep moving forward on to number 7. Step aside Squirtle and Totodile, because Mudkip is here. Well, Mudkip's final evolutionary stage, Swampert, is here. For those that don't know, Mudkip is your water starter type Pokemon from the Generation 3 games. And its final evolution, Swampert, is the best starter you could pick out of these games. Now that's actually not just my opinion, there's some stats which is why it landed so far forward on this list. First of all, let me start out with the fact that Swampert has great typing, being a water and ground type Pokemon. This typing now allows Swampert to negate electric type attacks, meaning it won't take any damage from them. Well, it'll still take damage in Pokemon Go, but it'll be 4 times resistant, so it'll be good. This typing also allows Swampert only to be weak to grass-type Pokemon. So hey, for those of us who love grass-type Pokemon, we now have something to use it on. Swampert. Swampert's going to have a max CP of 2,815. Swampert is also going to have a pretty good attack of 208, a pretty good defensive stat of 175, and a good HP of 200. This is going to make Swampert a good attacker and defender. However, at this point in the game, obviously there's a lot of high-tier attackers and high-tier defenders above Swampert, so its usefulness is going to come down to personal preference. I personally am going to be using my Swampert a lot just because I really like Swampert. But that's just my opinion. I'm sure there are people out there that hate Swampert. Those people are wrong. Swampert comes with the ability called Torrent. This ability is a lot like Blaziken's ability. However, in a pinch, when Swampert is suffering, its water type moves are going to get a boost in attack. I feel like I'm sensing a trend here. In conclusion, Swampert's going to be a great Pokemon, and I can't wait for its induction into Pokemon Go. Now it's time to move on to number 6, which just happens to be my all-time personal favorite Pokemon, Gardevoir, which if you listen to it really closely, sounds a lot like God of War, which is exactly what this Pokemon will do to you. Okay, that might have been a bit of an exaggeration, however, this Pokemon, I love it. It's my favorite. Gardevoir is going to come to the game with a max CP of 2,964. And I know Niantic doesn't do stat boosts, however, I really wish that they could just, if they could just nudge it over 3,000, that would just be fantastic. Gardevoir is going to have an attack of 237, a defense of 220, and an absolutely horrendous stamina stat of 136. Obviously, that's a pretty horrible stamina stat. However, its attack stat and pretty decent defensive stat hopefully will make up for it with good dodging skills. And honestly, for me personally, just looking at this guy, I really feel like it could have been a legendary Pokemon. I mean, it's so majestic. Gosh, I love it. I love it. Absolutely love it. Now let's talk about Gardevoir's amazing typing. A Psychic Fairy type. This is going to be the #1 counter to Dragonite and the best Dragon type Pokemon coming out of Pokemon Go in Generation 3, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Assuming you have 2 Fairy type moves. Obviously, it's a bit of a glass cannon. However, with 2 fairy type moves, it's going to make quick work of any dragon type Pokemon you put it in front of. Gardevoir has access to 2 different abilities. The first is called Synchronize. Basically, this ability passes on status effects to the foe. So in the main series game, if Gardevoir was paralyzed, its foe would also then become paralyzed. This ability is why I always loved Gardevoir growing up and carrying on into today, because no matter what, the playing field is always going to be even. Let's say a Jolteon paralyzes your Gardevoir, well, with Synchronize, that Jolteon also becomes paralyzed. It's the Pokemon version of giving something its own medicine. And when I battle my friends, well, they always hated that. Now let's talk about Gardevoir's second ability, Trace. This ability allows Gardevoir to copy its foe's ability. So let's say Gardevoir is attacking a Pokemon that has the ability Intimidate. So guess what? Gardevoir now has the ability Intimidate. Once again, this ability is basically just an even playing field. You're going to cut my Gardevoir's attack, well, I'm going to cut yours. Anyways, I'm sure you guys are sick of me talking about Gardevoir, so let's move on to number 5. The 5th spot on this countdown belongs to Milotic. Now when I think Milotic, not necessarily just looking at it, but also stat-wise, it reminds me a lot of Gyarados. However, Milotic is only a water type. It's going to come in with a max CP of 2,967, which is about 300 lower than Gyarados. Its attack is also much lower than Gyarados, coming in at only 192. Defensively, however, is where Milotic really makes a statement. It's going to have a defensive stat of 242, which absolutely blows Gyarados out of the water. HP-wise, they both have an equal stat of 190. Obviously, this makes Milotic the much better Pokemon defensively, and Gyarados the much better Pokemon offensively. So if you're going to put one of them in a gym, definitely drop in Milotic. This Pokemon also has access to 2 abilities. Its first ability is called Marvel Scale, which ups its defense when the Pokemon is suffering. As you can tell, even its first ability is geared towards the defensive end. Its second ability is called Competitive. In the main series game, this boosts its special attack when any other stat is lowered. We don't have a special attack stat in Pokemon Go. In the main series games, there were several other stats like special defense that also weren't included in Pokemon Go. However, should Niantic one day decide to make this game a little bit more complicated, hopefully those stats will be added into the game. However, as the game sits right now, I don't see that ability ever coming to Pokemon Go. That's about all I have to say on Milotic, so let's go on to number 4. The number 4 spot on this list goes to Aggron. Aggron is a rock steel type Pokemon, and it's going to be the first Pokemon on this list to reach above 3000 CP, coming in at 3004. CP. Being a dual rock steel type Pokemon, I'm sure I already know what you're thinking. This guy is going to be a beast defensively. If you were thinking that, ding ding ding, you are correct. This guy is a beast defensively. In fact, Aggron has the 4th highest defensive stat in the entire game of Pokemon Go. What is this stat, you might be asking? 314. However, it doesn't have a great stamina stat, coming in at only 140. Its attack stat isn't necessarily mind-blowing, but it is pretty decent and usable, coming in at 198. This guy's going to be weak to only ground and fighting type Pokemon. So if you like Hariyama, and now you have one, well, here's your chance to use it. This Pokemon also has access to 2 separate abilities. Its first ability is called Sturdy, which negates one-hit KOs. One-hit KOs aren't a thing in Pokemon Go. I guess unless you have like a Vaporeon with Hydro Pump and it's about to one-hit KO him, then I guess maybe I could see it being used there, but probably not. What we're most likely to see is its second ability called Rockhead, which prevents recoil damage. In the main series Pokemon games, recoil damage comes from attacks like Takedown that not only hurt the foe, but hurt the attacker as well. However, in the main series games, Takedown was a great move to have, considering that Aggron can't take that recoil damage. So this is actually an ability I could see implemented into the game with the introduction of moves that deal recoil damage like Takedown. There's not really a whole lot else to talk about Aggron other than the fact that it looks really cool. But good looks only get you so far, especially in Pokemon Go. So let's move on to number 3. Step aside Dragonite, because coming in at number 3, we have Salamence, the new best Dragon-type Pokemon. Salamence is going to come in with about the same CP as Dragonite, being 3,532. However, what sets Salamence apart from Dragonite is its attack stat being 14 points higher, coming in at 277. It's not quite as good defensively, coming in with only a stat at 168. However, it has 8 points higher of a stamina stat, coming in at 190. So basically, this is going to be Dragonite 2.0. If you're not convinced, even its secondary stage, Shelgon, is usable with a CP stat of 1958. Salamence is going to come to the game with the ability Intimidate, which we talked about earlier, which automatically cuts its foe's attack. Overall, this is going to be a fantastic Pokemon, and one that everybody is going to be sprinting towards if they happen to see one in the wild. But it's Pokemon like these in Generation 3 that I've been holding my rare candies for. Now time for number 2. Arriving at our number 2 spot, we have the Iron Leg Pokemon, Metagross. Now if we're talking specifically Generation 3, this is my second favorite Pokemon. I mean, just look at it. It looks fantastic. Not only does it look fantastic, it also has fantastic typing and fantastic stats. This is a Psychic Steel type Pokemon, which is really great typing. Sure, it'll be weak to ground, fire, dark, and ghost, but other than that, it's going to resist a lot of stuff. However, if you see a Tyranitar, definitely hide your Metagross. His CP stat is going to come in at 3,644, with an attack stat of 257, a defensive stat of 248, and a stamina stat of 160. Overall, those are really good stats, which is probably why it's number 2 on this list. Metagross's ability is called Clear Body. This prevents its stats from being lowered. So for instance, if it's Salamence versus Metagross, Salamance's Intimidate will render useless. It's not gonna work. You can't cut Metagross's attack, or any of his other stats for that matter. My only recommendation for this Pokemon is, if you see a Beldum, go get it and Pinap that thing. Now let's get serious for a moment. All the Pokemon I've mentioned on this list are going to be fantastic, and each and every one of these Pokemon is going to be very usable within the game. Now, as I mentioned on some of these Pokemon like Swampert, there are other Pokemon that could take this place, so it's going to be down to player preference. However, the Pokemon landing at the number 1 spot, it has no preference. Its only job is to kick and take names. By this time, I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. The king of loafing, Slaking. Slaking is very possibly the laziest Pokemon you will ever meet. That is, if you're lucky enough to meet one. Now, if you don't know at this point, I'm sure you're asking why all the hype. Let me spit it to you straight. This Pokemon has a max CP of 5,441, with an attack stat of 319, a defensive stat of 201, and a stamina of 300. Those stats are mind-blowing. So I'm sure you're wondering why this Pokemon isn't the most talked about Pokemon in any Pokemon game ever besides Legendaries. Well, that's because in the main series games, this Pokemon's ability was called Truant. And unlike all the other abilities we've mentioned previously, this ability doesn't help the Pokemon. In fact, it actually hinders its ability. Slaking was such a powerful Pokemon that Gamefreak decided it needed an ability to cut it. So Truant only allows Slaking to attack every other turn. Now I have a feeling that if abilities aren't implemented, Niantic is simply going to nerf this Pokemon down. I, however, think that would be a huge mistake. I feel like this would be the easiest ability for Niantic to implement into the game. Basically, I feel all they would need to do is slow down Slaking's attack speed, make it twice as slow as the other Pokemon. However, if Niantic doesn't add abilities in, at least not right away, again, which we'll talk about at the end of the video, they definitely probably need to nerf it down a little bit, because that's just unreal. This makes its CP higher than Mewtwo. Mewtwo, literally the clone of Mew. It's ridiculous that it has such a high CP. However, I absolutely love it, and I can't wait to battle one in a gym, alongside of having my own to place in gyms. So if you see a Slakoth at a Pokestop near you, I recommend you sprint there, because you're really not going to want to miss out on something this powerful. So that's it. That concludes our top 11 Gen 3 Pokemon coming to Pokemon Go. However, that doesn't mean that these are the only Pokemon that are usable in the game. There are a lot of other Pokemon left off this list, just because their CP isn't necessarily the highest. When Gen 3 finally comes to the game, you'll be able to find here on my channel a top 10 attacking list and a top 10 defensive list. Now on these lists, you'll be able to see a lot of the Pokemon we just talked about. However, you also see other Pokemon that maybe necessarily don't get all the limelight. So now let's talk about when Gen 3 could potentially be coming to the game. And I know I've talked about this previously on some of my last videos, but there have been some new leaks since my last video went up, and I want to talk about them with you guys. So first, here is a screenshot from usblastingnews.com. Obviously, we don't know how credible this source is, saying that Niantic is planning releasing these Pokemon around October 27th. I think that would be a fantastic fourth quarter update, considering it would give people time in fall to get out and catch these Pokemon before it gets too cold, but also allows people who like to play a lot play throughout the winter, and it really gives us something to do, unlike last winter where all we got were baby Pokemon. And I'm not gonna lie, I was super hyped about the baby Pokemon for about 2 weeks until I got a couple of them and couldn't manage to get Elekid, and then I just kinda got bored. I'm sure Niantic wants to avoid this giant dry spell in their game, which honestly, it almost killed the game this last winter. So in terms of keeping the game alive, that's why I think Gen 3 is going to be coming late October. Now on a little bit of personal research I've done, take a look at this. Now this screenshot's pretty old. I understand that it says just 10 days ago, but it was probably more like 3 weeks ago when I posted this thread on Reddit. I was just trying to find out from the community if anyone had heard anything and what everyone else's thoughts were on the coming of Generation 3. And this user, called Gen 3 Hype Train, great name by the way, told me that someone's uncle who works there said it'll be coming out late October. Now I got this post on Reddit long before this other article on US Blasphemy News came out, so it could be the same person spreading the hype around. And I understand someone's uncle who works for the company may not sound like the most legitimate source, but it's the only source we have right now. There's not really any fact checking we can do. We can only hope and pray to the mega god Ray Kwekwe that Generation 3 will be coming actually in late October as part of the Halloween event. Overall, again, that's just speculation, so don't get too excited. I got excited a little bit when I read it and then when I saw the article from blastingnews.com. However, nothing is for certain. I think it would be great if Niantic released Generation 3 end of October as our 4th quarter update, and then work feverishly throughout December, January, February, and give us PvP along with abilities late February, early March. Now I know this is a bit of a stretch and it would be kind of weird adding abilities in late, but I would rather wait for abilities and have them eventually implemented into the game than have them implemented early and have there be 1,000 bugs, and have Niantic trying to work through all these bugs throughout winter to fix abilities when they could be putting all their time into PvP. Those are my thoughts on why I think Generation 3 should come out now, and I know they're going to differ from a lot of yours, but adding new Pokemon to the game isn't too big of a stretch, I don't think, for Niantic to do. I don't think that's something that takes like a ton of manpower. However, something like PvP and abilities, I understand would take a ton of manpower. Which is why I would be totally cool getting Generation 3 without abilities in fall, letting them work all winter without any updates for us, except for maybe some minor bug fixes, because you know we all love those. And then late February, early March, getting PvP battling and abilities. By that time, my college basketball season will be over, and I'll be able to go back down to California and travel around and do a PvP battling series against anyone and everyone who wants a battle. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap up this episode, the top 11 Gen 3 Pokemon preview. I really do hope you enjoyed it. I also really hope you liked the in-depth stats and abilities that could be coming to the game. So if you did like it, leave a like. Leave a comment down below what your favorite Pokemon is coming to the game in Generation 3. And as always, if you do like my videos, please subscribe, because there's a lot more cool content coming very soon. That's it for me, guys. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you later.